Well, hello and welcome back to the Another Step podcast. My name's Kyle, in case we haven't met, and this is episode 4, I believe. All of the numbers on the episodes get a little bit confusing when you start with 0 and it's a pilot episode. But in case you're new around here, this is a podcast all about the rhythms and habits and practices that help people move forward and take another step toward becoming the person that they were created to be. And today we've got a really special episode. Last week, I was able to interview a coworker of mine named Sean, who was in ministry for 17 years at a singular place and then came back and did some stuff. And we're kind of continuing that theme today with another friend of mine, JD Morris, who's also been in ministry for a really long time. And I'm looking forward to that conversation. So to introduce JD, how you doing, man?
Hey, good. How are you, Kyle?
I am doing well. I'm caffeinated, as everybody on these podcasts knows. You got to do what you got to do. But things are going really well. So just to kind of kick things off, how has this time of year been for you and your family? You know, we just ended up Thanksgiving and all of those kinds of things. Did you guys travel? Did you stay in town? What was that like for you guys?
Yeah, so we stayed in town for Thanksgiving. My family is kind of split. Megan and I are both from Ohio originally. My side of the family is all in Ohio still. Megan's family followed her down a few years after we moved down here. And so her parents live about probably 20 minutes away from us. And so we go there for Thanksgiving and then go up to Ohio for Christmas. So it's a pretty crazy time of year, but the craziness is about to hit. Hasn't quite hit yet.
Right. Now, I see on Instagram all the time that you're Builtmore people. Like, how many times have you been to Builtmore just in the past month?
Oh, in the past month, just once. We have passes. I mean, it's an hour away, and It's a really peaceful place. We don't go into the actual house that often. We did last time to see the Christmas trees and lights and decorations. Normally, we go up there and we'll just have lunch, or we'll just hike, or just it's a real peaceful. Once you get on the property, it's really nice. And so Megan started it. She bought herself a pass a couple years ago, and then she bought me one, and so my day off is Monday. A lot of times we'll go up on a Monday and just spend half the day up there before the kids get back out of school. It's kind of a nice, relaxing place to go.
Yeah. I went on a field trip, I think in like the 4th grade, and I have not been back since. We say every year, we're like, oh, we need to go do that, and then we just never end up doing it. So as I mentioned before we started recording, there are a lot of people who will listen to this episode who know you. I guarantee there will be a lot of our friends in ministry and things like that hopefully will tune in and be listening or watching. But there's also a lot of people who don't know you from Adam. They are unfamiliar with who you are and what you're up to in the world. So you just take a minute and just kind of introduce kind of who you are, what you do, and how you got there.
Sure. Well, I am, like I said, originally from Ohio. Went to school at Lipscomb University in Tennessee for 4 years, graduated, and went back to Ohio for 2 years and worked in youth ministry up there before coming down here in 2007. So I've been here for almost 17 years now at the same church, Central Church of Christ in Spartanburg, South Carolina. Megan and I, we got married. Actually, I moved down here. We were engaged, and so I stayed down here for 4 months and then went back home, got married, and then she came down after me. So we've raised our family down here. We have 3 awesome kids. 2 of them are already in my youth ministry, and then 1 is coming up this coming summer. But yeah, that's pretty much who I am. I also dabble in some things on the side. Youth ministry doesn't always pay the bills, so I've done some real estate investing. We rent 3 cars out on Turo, which is a car rental app. And I've tried all kinds of things, Airbnb, tried different side hustles like that. I have an entrepreneurial spirit in me somewhere, and so I use side hustles to do that sometimes.
Okay, yeah, you definitely are, especially in like our group of ministers that we spend a lot of time with. You are the king of side hustles. Like, and this isn't a podcast about side hustles, but it totally could be, because I feel like every time we get together in Charlotte and we're all meeting together, it's like, so JD, what have you been doing? Well, you know, we finished up the rental property, and by the way, now I'm renting cars on Turo, and that's been really fun. In fact, we bought a car just to put on Turo, and I'm like, what is happening? Like, your life is much more interesting interesting in that regard than mine is. I actually had my first experience on Turo last month. We traveled to Franklin, Tennessee for a conference, and I rented a Tesla on Turo, which was cheaper than like a little hamster car on Enterprise. It was a really cool experience. I know you and I talked a little bit like, okay, what do I expect? Like we drove to the dude's house and picked up the car, which was slightly strange, but like it was also kind of cool. Got to like meet him, and he showed me how the car worked, which was definitely not something that you get at like a big box, car rental place. So that was really cool. So you talk about how you've got a lot, it sounds like you have a lot of, you wear a lot of hats, if you will. Like you've got ministry, and you got being a dad, and you've got all these side projects and things. So like, I'm not 100% sure if I believe in this whole idea of like a work-life balance, because it always feels like something is ever so slightly off, or you've got to place more focus on one rather than the other. But like, how do you keep all of that straight? Like, obviously you've got a church that's really gracious and allows you to do some of that stuff, but like, how do you mentally keep that straight and keep everything balanced?
Well, I don't always, I will say that. But I think for one, I'm a busybody. I don't like to just sit still. That side of my faith is a challenge for me, is just going into the woods and just sitting there and meditating and all that. I do it. I try to sometimes, but
sure.
I just like to be busy. So part of it is the way I'm wired, but also ministry, I think, really helps with that. Because like for me, Megan is very involved in the ministry that I run. She's basically a partner for me. She helps out with the girls, and she runs our Instagram and our Facebook page for us, and she does all kinds of things. And so when I do things, go to events, or especially in the summertime, she's right there alongside me, and the kids have been alongside us all along the way as well.
Sure.
So that's very helpful. Most people don't have that in their job.
Sure.
To be able to take their family with them whenever they go. And so even when I'm working, I'm still with my family. And then I think also it has changed over the years. When I first got into youth ministry in my early 20s, I was single, and all I did was ministry, just all the time. And one of the cool things that our elders did when they hired me, they called me up on stage the first Sunday, and they charged me charged me into ministry, or I don't know how they worded it, but basically they said my number one ministry was to my family. Now at the time I was engaged. I didn't even have a family yet.
Right.
But I remembered that, and I took that to heart. And so over the years, I used to go to all the kids' games and activities and concerts, all of that stuff. I used to just be nonstop in nights and weekends. Then I got married. We had kids very quickly, and my family needed me at home. And so we've kind of shifted our ministry focus now to really the three main times we meet every week. And I really invest heavily in our Sunday morning, Sunday night, and Wednesday night programs. And it's not that I don't do anything beyond those, but the majority of my ministry is done there, especially during the school year. And so that's been helpful to keep a balance as well.
There are some people who are listening to this who aren't in ministry, so they don't get the whole like challenge that comes with trying to figure out how to balance family life and ministry and people and everything else. But there are some people listening to this who are like, wow, you were given such a gift. Like from day one, your leaders said, hey, we want you to work here. Like we want you to be heavily invested. We believe in you, all the things. And yet on day one, they said, family comes first. Like there's no question about that. Like this is going to be the way things go. And that's a gift that a lot of guys don't have. A lot of guys and gals walk into ministry and it's just like, no, we want everything from you. And we're paying you for it. So you need to do it. So I just really kind of want to give some honor to your leadership in that regard. So you talk about, you started out in your ministry in your early 20s and you said you've been there a long time, but dude, you're only like 26 or 7. Like, what are you talking about? Like, have you been in ministry for forever?
That's why I wear the hat on, so you don't see my gray hair.
Oh, come on now. You've been in ministry at Central for 15 years, if I'm not mistaken.
It'll be 17 in June.
Wow.
That I've been at Central.
Okay, and
Yeah,
full-time.
and I've been in full-time ministry for 19 years total.
Wow. Okay.
I worked for 2 years in Ohio before coming down here. So I graduated in 2005. It seems like forever ago, but
Right. So 17 years in one place. I mentioned earlier I had Sean Brown on the podcast last week, who also spent 17 years at Palmetto in one position, particularly in youth ministry. And you and I both know that you guys are absolute outliers when it comes to the statistics of how long guys stay, particularly in youth ministry. Depending on the statistic, I think we mentioned last week, it's like 18 months to 3 years before you just kind of move on and find something different. So the fact that you guys have been faithful to a place and to a people for that kind of time really is a testament to who you are and those kinds of things. But like I asked him, and I just want to ask you, like, how did you do it? Like, how have you stayed at a place for 17 years, all the ups and the downs? Obviously, I'm sure there were times where you were like, yeah, I could hang it up today. Or I'm sure there were times where you were like, ooh, there's probably something better. But like, how did you stay persistent? How did you stay faithful for all of those years?
Well, it starts with what you already pointed out. We do have an excellent church, an excellent leadership at our church. And I mean, going back to the side hustle thing, one of our elders is a real estate investor here in Spartanburg. He's the one that got me into real estate investing, and he really strongly encouraged it. So,
that's cool.
He didn't look at it like, oh, well, you have a job to do. And, he saw this as like, hey, this could be a great opportunity for you to make some money on the side. And really, for me, it's more of a retirement plan, getting some rental properties to help me retire later. But so we have great, encouraging leaders. Our senior minister, Ernie, he's been here for over 30 years as the preacher, but then he's also he was on staff before that, so he's been here for almost 40 years, and he's been awesome to work with and to work for. He's protected me from a lot of things that a lot of ministers don't get protected from. Disgruntled members who just like to complain, things like that. So the leadership in the church is definitely one of the factors, and then for me personally, there's two people that I look back to that I think probably have helped me want to stay at the same place long term. One is Jordan Sager. Jordan Sager is a former youth group member of mine up in Ohio, and he came from a broken home. Both parents, I don't want to tell his story, but he had a rough upbringing, and he kind of stumbled into our youth ministry. His sister brought him to church, his grown sister who had a family of her own, and he really latched on to me. Of course, that was back when I was in my 20s, and he was really into video games, and he got me into video games, actually, and we just really connected. Yeah. And then the elders at that church came to me and said, it was a very small church, they said, look, we can't afford you. We're going to let you stay for 6 more months, but then we got to let you go because we just can't pay the bills. Sure. And so that's when I started looking around, trying to figure out what I was going to do next. And when it became very apparent that I was going to be moving to South Carolina and I was going to get the job at Central, Jordan was absolutely heartbroken. And now he was a 15-year-old. He didn't know, but he had been let down by so many adults in his life up to that point. Right. And it broke my heart that even though it wasn't my fault, I was letting him down by leaving. Totally. And so I just told myself, like, if I'm in ministry, I'm a servant to these students, and these students need, as much as anything, they need stability in their life, especially the ones that come from homes that are not very stable. And of course, you know this, a lot of people might not know this, but Central, one of our biggest partners, is Southeastern Children's Home here in Duncan, South Carolina, and their homes have been part of our youth ministry as long as I've been here. And so there's a lot of kids that come from broken homes, broken families. And so I really had a deep desire, and I prayed really hard about it. Like, God, if I'm moving here, I want to be here long term. And so that commitment really set in early for me. And then the second was a guy named Mike Gawley. He was kind of a mentor of mine. He was a youth minister in Cincinnati. We went to the same church camp up in Ohio. And I remember he had been at his church for about 7 years, right about the time I got into youth ministry. So I asked him, I said, man, what's it like being at the same place for 7 years? Because in my mind, that seemed like forever.
It's forever. Yeah.
And he said, I've been here for 7 years, and I feel like I'm just now getting the point where I can actually minister to these kids. Wow. And so I really latched onto that as well and thought, okay, there's something special about staying at a place long term. Right. And so I committed to it. And as far as what I've learned, there's no perfect place to work. And if there were, God wouldn't need ministers to work there. So that's right. Yeah. I have looked around. I've looked around from time to time, and I've just realized, like, if I go somewhere else to get away from the problems here at Central, because there are problems, I'm just going to find other problems. Yep. And I didn't get into ministry to escape problems, Yeah, so I mean, God called me into ministry to help people with their problems. Right. Couple other things real quick that I've learned, just having to do with being at the same place long term. One is burnout is inevitable. Everybody goes through it. I think everybody, no matter what they do, goes through burnout, and I've certainly been through my share of burnout. Right. And what I've learned with myself is burnout. I've learned how to recognize when it's coming and how to fight it and how to deal with it and kind of anticipate it. In fact, for me, it's very seasonal. So about every spring, I know that for like the month of April, beginning of May, I'm just going to be worn out and exhausted and questioning, am I even effective anymore, God? What am I doing here? But I also know that summer's coming, and summer's like my favorite time of year for ministry. And I know if I can just get to summer, God's going to use me in big ways when those kids are out of school, and I've got them for that long. And then the last thing, I'll let you let you follow up because I've been talking a long time. But
no, you're good.
The last thing is I've seen a lot of guys leave their spot because of interpersonal problems. They just have a problem with one elder or one family or some. They leave because they just can't take it anymore. Whatever it is, whatever that problem is. And for me, I've learned staying at the same place that a lot of those interpersonal problems tend to work themselves out over time. If you work through them, and you tend to, once you work through them, you tend to end up making a lot of close relationships when you work through those problems as opposed to run from them. And so we've built some pretty deep relationships here just by staying long term that were people that early on I didn't like so much and they didn't like me, but over time they've kind of become some of my best supporters.
I resonate with that a lot because there is this temptation, and I think part of this contributes to the reason that a lot of guys who get into ministry leave so quickly is because they face some kind of challenge, or there was a parent that didn't like them, or they wanted to do something and the leadership didn't let them, or whatever it was, and they just decide to leave. But I think what you said is so wise, to acknowledge that when you persist through those things instead of running from them, God actually kind of turns them around. And as you said, like, sometimes those people end up being some of your biggest supporters because they've seen you through the whole thing, and now they've seen you on the other side and said, oh, okay, yeah, I really believe in them. So I think that's crucial, regardless of whether you're in ministry or not. Like, people want to jump from thing to thing. I'm sure that a lot of the statistics that are about ministry apply to all kinds of careers. I was sitting and talking just this morning to two friends of mine. One is she's the head over some of the personal relations at a local nonprofit, and the guy is a banker here in town. And I'm sure that in both of their workplaces, they experience the exact same thing. There's some kind of strife. Oh, yeah. So somebody just says, hey, I'm going to be out. Or, this thing got more complicated than I thought it was going to be, so let me go find the next thing. So I love that you said that, but I really want to back up and I want to talk about that burnout thing, because I think what you had to say was really key. Like, I even had to pull out my pen and start taking notes because this was solid. Talk more for a second about this idea of burnout being seasonal, because I definitely resonated with that idea. You said kind of every year around the same springtime, you're starting to feel it. What do you think causes that in your life, in your ministry? What do you think? Why do you think it ends up being seasonal? And then are there a couple of things other than just like knowing that summer ministry is around the corner? Are there some things that you like practically do that help you get through that season and come out on the other side?
Yeah, for me, the seasonal part, I think, comes from just the school year, because when the teenagers are at school, they're surrounded by their peers, they're surrounded by people who, whatever, they're just not surrounded by the best influences on a regular basis. And so inevitably, when you're in that environment day in, day out, and your focus isn't even really your faith, then you're going to be influenced negatively, and you're going to feel far away from God. And so I feel like a lot of what burns me out in spring is just the long school year, and I spend more time in the office in the school year. I spend more time preparing for ministry and not doing ministry.
Ooh, that's
good. That's the part that burns me out the most. And the part that really feeds my soul, and you know, I love lock-ins. I'm one of the weirdest youth ministers in the world that actually loves lock-ins.
Stop.
But I know. It's for me, it's like I love that time, because that's when kids, you see a side of a kid that you're never going to see otherwise. Same thing with places like church camp or Bible camp, whatever it is.
Sure.
When you're around them, retreats, they get to see the real you, and you get to see the real them, and you get an opportunity to really make a difference in their life. And I mean, that's what I signed up for when I got into ministry. I wanted to make a difference. And so I think for me, I feel like I'm not making as much of a difference during the school year, just because they're so busy and they're just going nonstop. And so I feel like I'm fighting for every second I get. And so come spring, after doing that for 9 months, I'm just exhausted, feeling like, what's the purpose of this? Like, why am I even doing this? Does youth ministry even matter? You know, it's just another thing for them to do to keep them busy. And then summer hits, and, you know, I see that, you know, I'm with them constantly through the 100%. Summer, and I see that growth and see that fire come back. I don't remember what else you asked about that.
No. I think what you said is gold. The only thing that I disagree with is that lock-ins are from the devil himself. There is no question about it.
I'm telling you, I'm weird when it comes to that.
We're having ours. I've been here for just over 2 years now. We're having our first one at the very end of the year. It was one of those, like, I made a promise to our kids, and technically, like, they never held up their end of the bargain. They were supposed to, like, do some things, and it was, hey, if you will do this, then I will do a lock-in, because they know how I feel about them. And yet somehow it got put on the calendar, and they kind of turned it on me and said, hey, it's on the calendar. We got to do it now. And I'm like, crap. So we're having a lock-in 2 days before I preach. I'm not 100% sure if that was the greatest scheduling, but here we are anyway. So we'll figure out how it goes. If I'm still in ministry here in a couple of weeks, then that means everything went smoothly. But I totally resonate with this. Like, ministry is different during the school year. Summer ministry is its own animal. And you know this with mission trips and work camps, and you're getting together more often because your schedules are wide open, but it also means people are traveling. So there's just a lot of stuff that goes into it. But man, it's like you hit like the first week after Labor Day, and now everybody's like really back in town and they got to go to school. It's like, I'm not going to say everything comes to a screeching halt, but man, everything comes to a screeching halt. And now we're only together a couple of days out of the week, and that's if kids show up every time. So relationships are way harder.
August and probably September too, I'm kind of happy that they're back in school. I mean, it's like, because you go so hard in the summer. It's kind of like, that's why I don't get burnt out in August or September, because it's like, hey, I got some routine in my life. I can start exercising again. I can stop eating pizza. It's, you know. So I usually look forward to August and September, but then once that school year grinds, I think for me anyways, that's why springtime I get burnt out.
Yeah. See, that's interesting because when I start to feel the effects of burnout or exhaustion or whatever word you would put to it, it's usually in that August, September timeline. And I think probably part of it has to do with unsustainable pace. Like there is a reason that kids go back to school in August. Like we could not maintain that level of movement and activity for longer than about 3 months. Like we kind of hit a wall. But those are the times when I'm like, I don't know how much left I have in the tank. But usually around October, November, I'm like, oh, okay, I can breathe a little bit again and I feel all right. And now ministry is kind of flowing again because we've settled into that pace. But I can totally see how even that can kind of make you question, like, are we ever going to get to like do anything anymore? Like you kind of look forward to the stuff.
I will say that, I mean, I feel like maybe I'm talking about two different things because I do feel that in August and September.
Sure.
I just don't, I don't question whether I want to do ministry anymore in August or September. For me, it's more, I'm just physically and mentally exhausted and I need a break. And so like we did for a long time, probably before COVID, and then COVID changed things. But Megan and I, our anniversaries in September, and we used to take a trip every September. Right after our fall retreat that we all do together, we used to take a trip, and that was the perfect time. Yeah, and it just was so reviving to my soul because I was so worn out. But to me, the burnout I'm talking about that comes in the spring has more to do with me questioning my calling and questioning being in youth ministry specifically. Whereas August and September, I'm beat and I need a break, but it's more, I don't feel like I'm questioning, am I doing any good then? I feel like, man, we just did some really cool stuff. It was really fun, but I'm ready for a break.
I think you're hitting the nail on the head. So when you are facing that, like questioning your call type burnout, I mean, what do you do to get through that? Are there practices that you kind of settle back into, or do you just have to push through?
One is I do try to find ways to connect to God personally, a little bit more. And I try to, spring it's kind of the calm before the storm as far as how busy you are. So I have more time to focus on study or focus on prayer, or focus on spiritual disciplines that are going to help fill me up. Right. Also, I think because I've seen it and I've kind of recognized it. It took me a long time to realize that it was seasonal. I kind of know it's coming, and so I can gear up for it. The last probably 5 years, the last time I really questioned my call in the youth ministry was I'm 41 now. I think I was 35 when this happened. So about 6 years ago. And I actually applied for a new job and interviewed and ended up not getting it. But that process, I was really asking God, like, do you want me to stay in youth ministry, or do you want me to do something else, or can I be freed up to go do something secular and just leave ministry? And it was probably about a 2-month process of praying, questioning, really struggling, and even interviewing and looking at other possibilities. Right. And when I came out of that, I felt very confident that God had me where He wanted me. And so I made a commitment to God then that I wasn't going to question my call anymore. And when I wanted to question my call, that I would remind myself of that time and say, no, God's got me where He wants me. And so my plan up until, I'm sure you might ask about this at some point, but my plan up until this past year was not to question my call to youth ministry again until my youngest child, who's in 6th grade right now, graduated high school. And then at that point, I would go back to God and say, God, do you want me to do something else now? Wow. Now, obviously, the past year that's changed a little bit, but but that's kind of I just remind myself of that time in my life and the commitment I made, and I said, okay, I'm not, because there was probably about 30 to 35, like 5 years in a row, or it was like every year I was like, am I still called to youth ministry? And I was like, I can't do this every single year. So I just finally said, I'm either here or I'm not. And once I decided I was here, that was it.
Wow. Thank you for being authentic and honest with that, because I think a lot of us would just kind of paint over it and gloss over it, but to acknowledge, like, yeah, I was questioning the whole thing and I was willing to leave it, and to walk through that process, I can imagine was quite the experience. But I do think there's something about that commitment piece. Like you just kind of said, hey, I'm either in or I'm out. Like we gotta define the relationship here and run after it or run away. So I think that's huge. I do want to get to the transition point here in just a second, which you've alluded to for a moment. But I do want to hit this piece. You mentioned that you committed to not questioning the call, at least until your youngest made it through high school. And you said earlier, like she's about to come into the youth group, right? So she's, when does y'all's youth group start? Is it 7th grade?
Yeah. Okay. We promote them right after they finish 6th grade. Into the summer, they come up to youth group.
Gotcha. Okay.
We went into their 7th grade year.
We did that for a while, and now we're down to 6th grade. We did it because we had a couple like really small classes, and we were bringing in like one student at a time. But now I'm kind of in a space where I'm like, whew, there's a lot of these like really young kids coming in. And it's a challenge for sure. But even this was not what, I didn't put this in the notes that I sent you, anything like that. But I just want to pick your brain for a second. How do you balance being your kid's youth minister and being their dad? This has always been something that I've wrestled with myself, and I've said from the beginning, like, I don't want to be my kid's youth minister and their dad. Like, I just want to be their dad. But how do you balance that? Like, how do you make sure, I mean, do you, I don't know. I'm just going to lay that one out there and just see what you have to think.
Yeah. That's a good question. I haven't thought about it, but I guess it's really helpful for me because my kids have been talking about wanting to be in youth group since they were little, because they've pretty much been like our youth group mascots for all these years.
Totally.
And so when they were in elementary school, they always said, I can't wait to get into youth group. And, so now that the 2 older ones are in, I've loved every second of it because I get instant feedback on everything I do. So on the way home from church, I can ask them, hey, what'd you think of that class? What went well? What didn't go well? And they'll be honest with me. They'll tell me, like, yeah, I thought this one was good, or at least I think they're honest with me. But they'll tell me, yeah, this one that didn't work so well. Or our oldest daughter, she's very creative, and she's awesome because I can go to her and say, hey, I want to plan this summer kickoff party. What do you think we should do at it? And she'll just take it and run with it. And then I know it's like, okay, I'm doing something that I know the teenagers are going to love because, I'm older now, so I don't always think the way that they think. And so sometimes ideas I have, they're like, this is lame. But personally, as far as balancing between being their dad and being their youth minister, I guess I don't see much of a difference. I mean, there is a little bit of a struggle of, it's tempting to want to call my own kids out when everybody's talking in class, or it's tempting to be a little extra hard on them just because I can be because I'm their dad. Sure. So I try to fight that as best I can. And our son, he gives me grief. In fact, last night, he's like, I was paying attention the whole time, and you called me out when it was the guys next to me talking. And I was like, I'm sorry, man. You were paying attention. It was my fault. It was just easier to call you out to get their attention. So I'm sorry.
Yeah, totally.
But so far, I think probably just their attitude toward it has made the difference more than anything, because they just love being in our youth ministry. And in fact, with this transition coming up, they're really struggling with wrapping their minds around having somebody who's a youth minister other than us. Now, I do think that I think there might be a little bit of God's handiwork involved in that, because it's like when the kids have conflict with other kids in youth group, it's hard to be the middleman. And so we've had to deal with that a couple times, and I think that maybe there's been times where we've had to deal with some struggles, and I would love to go to a youth minister and say, hey, can you talk to my son about this? But I can't because I'm the youth minister. And so So I am looking forward to that, moving forward, having that ally that can work with my kids that's not me. But but so far it's, there's been good and bad, but I think their attitude towards it has made it easy.
Well, and you've got, I only get to see your kids a few times a year, camp and retreats and things like that, but you've got really, really great kids. So like, I think when you ask your daughter for feedback or input, I do think they're being honest with you. I think they are being upfront and sharing how they do feel about stuff. And that's a gift. So I love that. I love that you've been able to walk through this thing of balancing those roles with a lot of grace. And I'm sure it gets complicated at times. I think calling them out in class is probably the simplest kind of thing. I'm sure you probably wish that was all you had to do, but trying to balance it can be a challenge for sure. But I also love that you mentioned that they're feeling the effects of this transition. And this is kind of a nice way to go ahead and start talking about it. So here, I remember where I was when you told me about this transition that you're making. I was sitting on the balcony at our beach house vacation this year, and I get a text from my wife saying, "Did you see what Megan posted on Facebook?" And I'm like, "No, I'm not on Facebook this week. What are you talking about?" And next thing you know, I'm sitting down for a conversation with you. So for just to kind of catch our listeners up, you were in the process of transitioning from one role at Central to another. You're going from the youth minister to serving as, what do y'all call that position? Is it lead minister? Is it preaching minister?
Yeah.
Is it a catch-all? What do y'all calling that?
Yeah, so we're calling it the lead minister.
Okay.
And so that's what my title will be starting January 1st.
All right.
And it's a long transition. We started it back at the beginning of June or end of May. I'm transitioning out of my role in youth ministry. That my role in youth ministry will end at the end of this coming summer. Wow. So it's a long transition. Sure. I'm taking over all of our senior minister who's retiring. Okay. I'm taking over all of his administrative duties. So the way our church is structured, we have elders that they set the vision, they make the final decisions on things, but they have delegated a lot of the day-to-day responsibilities to our senior minister. So he's in charge of the staff. We answer to him, and then he answers to the elders for us.
Okay.
And this has been very helpful because our elders, half of them are still working and they have their own lives. And so for them to be able to keep tabs on all of us, it just wasn't working real well. Right. So I'm going to be taking over all of Ernie's administrative roles. So setting the budget and leading the staff meetings and being over the staff and setting the church calendar and making sure that things run smoothly. Wow. That starts in January. And then I'm transitioning between now and September when he fully retires, or, well, sort of fully retires. I'm going to I'll become also the lead preacher. And we're kind of developing a preaching team.
Cool.
And that's really for my sake because I need to grow into the role of preacher. I've never seen myself as a preacher before. And so they're giving me an opportunity to grow into that role. So we have 3 guys that will be part of the preaching team. Right now, I'm part of it, and I'm preaching about once a month. Okay. Ernie's the main preacher, and then our media minister, Michael Morton, is our 3rd guy on the team. In September, Ernie's going to stay on part-time and be part of that preaching team, and then he might do a couple other smaller things just around the church and help out, but he's really stepping back. I mean, he's taking a whole month off and kind of entering retirement at that point. Yeah. So I will become the lead preacher, and then Michael will be part of that team as well.
That is quite the shift. I mean,
it is.
Like, youth ministry is busy, don't get me wrong. It's hectic, and there's a lot of different hats that you have to wear even underneath that one role. But that's you're taking on not just preaching, but also like leadership of lots of different pieces and parts. So how are you feeling about all of that? Like, how, I know you've had some time to kind of work through this transition, and you guys have been talking about it for quite some time now, but how are you feeling about some of that?
I'm probably feeling everything. I mean, every emotion you can think of, I'm feeling. Sure. I'm both excited and terrified. kind of, I've known about this since last February that this was probably going to happen, and I've known it's going to happen since last April. And so I'm kind of anxious for it to just get started, because it's like, we've been talking about it for so long, but at the same time, I would rather just not get started. So, I mean, it's all kinds of mixed emotions.
Sure.
Honestly, it's very similar to, we didn't talk about this, but my call into youth ministry was very reluctant. I did not want to go into youth ministry, and God had to kind of twist my arm and get me there.
Wow.
And I feel like that's what this has been too. Okay. I mean, a year ago, I had a friend sit down with me who's one of my best friends, and he kind of asked me, like, where do you see yourself in 10 years? Or, what do you really want to do when you're done doing youth ministry? He's like, you're not going to retire as a youth minister, so what do you want to do? Yeah. And I had, in a moment of honesty, I basically said, if I had it my way, this is what I would do. And I spelled out exactly what's happening. Now, at the time, I had no idea that was ever going to be a possibility. I thought the elders weren't thinking that. Ernie wasn't thinking that. I'm not a preacher. They don't see me as a preacher. Right. But I thought, in order to stay at Central, I'd love to take on a lot of the things I feel like I'm gifted at, which is all the administrative stuff, and then kind of slowly grow into being the preacher, as with lots of work and more school and all that. And then literally 2 months later, Ernie came to me and said, "Hey, I've been thinking about this a lot. I know I'm going to be retiring soon. We need to get a plan in place. Here's what I have in mind. Let me know what you think." And he spelled it out almost identical to what I had told my friend. So it was kind of crazy. Overall, I'm excited. I'm looking forward to it. There's part of me that's grieving the leaving youth ministry after all these years, and there's a lot of things that I'm going to miss. But I'll still be connected to Palmetto Bible Camp, so at least a couple times a year I'll get to still be youth minister. And I think there's a lot of elements to youth ministry, probably not lock-ins, but there's some other elements that I'll get to bring to the lead minister role.
Church-wide lock-in, let's go.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, dude, I had never heard the side of the story where you had sat down with a friend and had basically spelled the entire thing out. And I love how God works like that sometimes. It's like he's already put something in your heart, and then next thing you know, it's happening. And I resonate with there's 1,000 different emotions, and you're feeling them all at the same time. And yet, like you and I have worked alongside one another for 7 or 8 years now in various capacities with retreats and events and things like that. And I remember watching the presentation video that Ernie put together, and I obviously knew the entire thing, but like when he was describing who they were looking for and how this person needed to fit certain roles, I was like, oh, of course this is JD. Like there's no question. So like I think God has done some serious work in you and in Central over the past 17 years that's brought you to this spot. And I think he's set you up so that you've got a beautiful transition. As hard, as complicated as it might be, I really think a lot of the work has been done to pave your road ahead of you. So what are you learning from this? I mean, has it been more challenging than you thought? Have you seen church from a different angle now? Like what are you learning?
I'm just starting to see some of this, because I haven't really fully taken over any role yet, but I've been working with Ernie very closely over the past 3 months and kind of preparing myself for the role I'm taking on in January. And so I've been able to see a side of Central that maybe I was sheltered from before. And so one of the things I'm learning, and I hope this doesn't come across wrong, but there's a lot of hurt and a lot of pain, and as a minister, you kind of have to bear that burden for your congregation.
No, that's true.
And there's going to be a lot of times, or maybe not a lot, but there's going to be times where I have to bear that solely, and I can't even talk about it to my wife when I come home.
Right.
And already there's been once or twice where I've come home and just laid in bed and had to roll over to turn away from Megan and just kind of cried a little bit because of what I was feeling. Right. And she knew something was wrong, and I had to just let her know, like, I'm sorry, I can't tell you. I can't talk about it. But so that's one side that kind of caught me off guard, because I mean, you have that in youth ministry too, but I guess with adults the problems are
it's bigger,
are real.
Yeah.
And so that's one thing, and that's probably the sad part of it. I still haven't. Ernie and I have not had an argument yet, so I'm still waiting to learn to see what that looks like.
That's nice.
I'm not a very I'm not a take charge kind of person. I'm very much go with the flow, and I think that my personality has helped with that, because I'm not going to come in and just say this is how it's going to go from here on out. I mean, I'm going to be looking for help and advice. I mean, the guy's been here, as almost as long as I've been alive, and so he's got so much experience. It'd be foolish of me not to listen. But I am waiting. He and I have kind of both talked about that and laughed about that. It's like, okay, what's he going to do when I make a decision that he doesn't like? Or what am I going to do when I make a decision he doesn't like and he voices it to me? How are we going to handle that? And we haven't gotten there yet, so we'll see.
That's a gift. That's a gift.
But I don't know. There's probably other things I'm learning. There's expectations that are going to be put on my family and my wife that I thought that we had in youth ministry, and we definitely have them in youth ministry, but it's only going to be heightened. And so Megan and I have had to have a lot of conversations about how to handle that. And I'm the type of person that I don't tend to want to listen to what other expectations of other people. If I feel like they're not legitimate, I tend to just kind of scoff at them and brush them off. And Megan's the type of person that it weighs her down when somebody comes to her and says you should be doing this, whether she thinks she should or not. It's like all of a sudden she feels this huge burden to do it. And so we've had a lot of talks about how to help her prepare.
Sure. Even
though she's not entering a paid role, she is entering a role.
Yes.
Just by being my wife, and so we've talked a lot about that. I don't know that we've learned anything yet, but we're working on it.
Right. But I mean, what a gift that you've got somebody like Megan to learn those lessons alongside of. I mean, she truly does. She does as much work as some youth ministers that I know. You and I both know how passionate she is about your students and the ministry. And it's beautiful to see. And I hope that she's still able to enjoy some of that even as the roles transition. So I tell you, this has been such a helpful conversation for me. It's amazing when someone's able just to pull back the curtain ever so slightly, because there's so much about your ministry and this transition and everything else that you haven't said, nor did you need to say, but just something about being able to pull back the curtain just a little bit, especially for guys like me who are, maybe a decade behind you and are already kind of thinking about some of this, like, hey, what do I want to be doing in 5 or 10 years? What does life continue to look like? So I really am grateful for the way that you've been examples for guys like me who are just a little bit behind. But this conversation has been a real blessing. So I want to begin to kind of start to land the plane. This podcast is called Another Step. And I said at the beginning that the whole premise that I wanted to hit when I started this podcast was I just want to sit down with people that I admire, people that I look up to, friends of mine, and talk about the things that help them to grow and help them become the person that they are, take another step toward whatever it is, the dreams and the goals that they have. You and I are pastors, so we obviously are thinking about becoming the person God created us to be, but not all of our audience ascribes to that worldview and, believes the same kinds of things that we do. But there's something about the little stuff, it's just little practices, little habits and little rhythms that help us take those kinds of steps. So is there one or two just really practical habits, disciplines, rhythms that you take part in on a regular basis that help you move forward in that endeavor?
Yeah, and these are going to be a little bit more spiritually focused, but I think they'd be helpful for anybody, whether you're a Christian or not. But the two that I would say have helped me the most I got to preface this by saying I don't do these all the time, okay?
Sure.
But when I do them, they've helped me tremendously, and those are fasting and accountability. So fasting is something that I did a lot when I was younger, and I'm trying to get back into it, but my self-discipline has been kind of weak lately. But when I have fasted, what I was doing was I was fasting once a week for 24 hours.
Wow.
And the day that I fasted was awful. And I was grumpy. I was irritable, taking it out on everybody.
Yes.
But what I realized, I did it for about a year.
Wow.
A lot of the things that I struggled with, like anger, some of the sins that were just present in my life, I started gaining self-control over those. It's like when you practice self-control over your body, your physical body, then it develops that self-control in other areas of your life. And so I would highly recommend, if nobody's tried fasting, to give it a try, because I think there's some definitely spiritual benefits, but there's some practical benefits to it as well, just by gaining self-control, being able to be more disciplined in your life. Absolutely. And then accountability, just being able to have somebody, again, I haven't done this consistently all the time, but when I do it, I currently have somebody helping me stay accountable with exercise and diet and some of the goals I have. And when you have somebody that's just constantly asking you, hey, did you exercise today? For me, it's like, I know that he's going to text me, probably around 2:00 this afternoon. I better get on that bike and ride for half an hour, or I better, do something. Yeah. Cause I don't want to tell him no. I don't want to tell him no over and over again. So, so that's been helpful too.
Yeah, that's really solid. Look, fasting for most people, particularly in our culture, is like just this strange thing. And they're like, why would I not eat? Like, this is ridiculous. And I remember that I'm kind of like you, like I go in waves and go in seasons where like fasting is a part of my rhythm. We practice a weekly family Sabbath. And I used to fast the day before the Sabbath so that we'd kick off Friday night with this really great meal. We'd eat tacos together. We'd invite people over. It was this whole thing. But dude, the whole, like, the day of the fast, it was terrible. Not only was I just hangry, but like Rachel, my wife, would often be like, please tell me you're not fasting this week. Because it's just like same thing. All of the stuff that's inside of you starts to come up.
That's exactly it. Yeah. That's how I've described it before.
It's like it reveals the stuff that you didn't even know was there.
Yeah. It forces you to deal with what's deep down in your heart. And like you said, you didn't even know was there. But when you fast and you're hangry, it comes out to the surface, and then you have to deal with it. You don't have a choice.
Yeah. But then talk about on the other side, like talk about the self-control aspect and the growth that comes from that. It's a superpower. I mean, truly. And now I'm as hungry as I am right now because I haven't eaten today. I'm kind of like, maybe I need to bring fasting back into the weekly rhythm. So thanks for that. Appreciate it. So on every episode of this podcast, we're going to have some rapid fire-ish questions. Some of them will be nice, simple answers. Others you may have to think a little bit about. But I want to know, what is one book that you think everybody should read?
Okay, so Sean Brown took 2 last week, so I'm going to take 2 also.
You can have 2.
One is a spiritual book, and it's Celebration of Disciplines by Richard Foster, and that's the one that first started me out on my fasting journey. Oh, sure. But there's 12 disciplines that he focuses on in that book, and they're all very helpful and incredible. The other one is not a spiritual book. It's one that I think every person in the world should read. It's called Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki, and it teaches you it gives you the right perspective of what the purpose of money and what money is for. And I read that book right before I got into real estate investing and all that, and it just helped me realize like what I was doing wrong versus what I needed to be doing, and it just was extremely helpful.
Yeah. I'll make sure for anybody listening or watching, there will be links to both of those books, Amazon affiliate links down in the description of this video or in the show notes of the podcast in case you want to pick up either of those. I wholeheartedly second Celebration of Discipline. I have not read Rich Dad Poor Dad. It's on my list of ones to read, but Celebration of Discipline is just absolute gold. Okay, what is one movie that you think everybody should watch?
Okay, I'm embarrassed to say this one. I'm not a huge movie buff. I want you to know that.
Cool.
And so I just decided I'm going to tell you what my favorite movie is because I don't know that everybody needs to watch this one.
Sure.
But I'm a child of the 90s, man. Braveheart is it.
Okay,
Braveheart's my favorite movie.
Let's
and
go.
I know that, Mel Gibson is whatever he is, but that movie just is incredible. It gets me fired up every time. So
let's go. Okay.
So I'm sticking with it.
Hey, that's all good. Episode 1, my friend Travis, I asked him this question and he was like, I don't know if I'm supposed to, it's Goodfellas. And I'm like, dude, that's the movie. It's all good. Like, this is your movie. I'm good with it. Okay. What is one quote that you live by?
That one's easy. Matthew 6:33. Seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well. That's been my life verse for many, many years now, and it has not steered me wrong.
Love it.
So I would recommend anybody living by that.
100%. Okay, I'm going to skip around a little bit based on the notes that I sent you. If you had to eat one meal every day for the rest of your life, what would it be?
So my first answer was pizza, but Sean said pizza last week, and that's such a stereotypical youth minister thing. I know. So my second one, and probably right up there with pizza, is the other one is burger and fries. I mean, you just can't go wrong with a good burger and fries.
Of course.
So
I'll tell you, if there were no adverse health benefits, I'd have a bacon cheeseburger and sweet potato fries every day for the rest of my life. My life might significantly be shortened, but it'd be an enjoyable one for sure.
That's right.
All right, if you could get in an airplane, let's imagine it's an airplane that's like supersonic speeds, all the things. You can get in at GSP where you're at and fly anywhere in the world in an hour. Where would you go?
I'm going to Kauai, the Hawaiian island of Kauai.
Okay.
I've been there once before, and I hope someday I get to go back because it's incredible.
Yeah, okay.
It's a paradise.
Yeah, for sure. I don't know off the top of my head which island is which. We got stuck in Honolulu one time on the way to a mission trip for a couple of days, and that was really great. But even still, it was one of those, I got to go back. So I'm 100% with you. Hawaii is just absolute wonderland. Okay. One more before we start wrapping this thing up. Tell me about your morning routine.
So right now my morning routine is wake up at 5 and of course get my coffee right away. Of
course.
And then I sit down and study. I'm in school for grad school right now. So I study from about 5 to 7. And then at 7 o'clock I put the studying on hold, take my kids to school, drop them off, and kind of go through that whole routine.
Right.
And then when I'm good, when I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing, I come back, and that's when I do my exercise. Mm-hmm. And then I get ready for the day and try to get into the office by 9. Nice. I'm not that sometimes the school is just so draining that by the time I get done dropping the kids off, right, I'm just exhausted mentally, and I don't have the discipline to work out. So sometimes I end up having to work out later in the afternoon. But when I'm on my routine, that's what it is. Nice.
Okay. So you're in grad school, lots of studying, things like that. How many classes have you done so far?
I'm just now finishing up my second. So I just started. Okay. I took a summer class, and then this fall was my first class, and then spring I'm taking 2. Okay,
very cool, very cool. How are you liking the grad school experience?
I like it a lot for the most part. The summer class was incredible.
Sure.
This class this fall was good. The professor was excellent. I feel like the material I wasn't as interested in it as I was in the summer class, but it's more like stuff you just got to know as a minister. You got to learn this stuff. And so it felt like I was kind of pushing my way through it a little bit more than I had to in the summer. The summer I was soaking up every page. It was awesome.
What class was the fall class?
The fall is the critical intro to the Old Testament.
Oh, yeah.
So there's some really interesting stuff in there. Don't get me wrong. There's been parts that have been very enjoyable, and overall I like the class, but it's just not. It's probably not one that I'm going to write a doctorate paper in, a thesis paper in, or anything.
Yeah, I remember when I started grad school, Critical Introduction to the New Testament was the first class that I took. And we have pictures. Our son Aslan had just been born when I'm taking this class, and we have a lot of pictures of me sitting at the dinner table with him in one arm and a textbook in the other arm, and I'm putting him to sleep by reading it out loud, and in the process also probably awesome. Putting myself to sleep. But yeah, talk about like, it's the stuff that, it's not that it doesn't come up when you're teaching, but it's like, you're not going to go be like, hey guys, I'm going to preach today on the authorship of Jonah. And you're just like, this isn't what anybody needs to hear, but it can be rich. It can be interesting, things like that. So I totally understand the difference between taking a class that feels more practical and, might not feel that way necessarily, but this isn't a podcast about grad school. Maybe that can be a whole separate conversation. Cause now that I'm on the other side of it, I have very mixed emotions, primarily because of the amount of student debt that I accrued, but we're not going to talk about that today. Cause it's pretty wild. Well, JD, I want to say thank you. Not just for like coming and being on a podcast for an hour and taking time out of your morning, out of your day, because as you said, you have a lot of stuff going on, but truly for the relationship that you and I get to have, the friendship that you and I get to have, the way that you have paved the way for guys like me that are figuring out this youth ministry thing, figuring out how do you balance being a dad and a minister and trying to like, not be unhealthy in the process. And we want to kind of figure all that out. I'm so grateful for you. I'm really grateful that we get to sit and talk pretty regularly on a computer, pretty similar to this one. This time we just got to record it. So normally I would get to the end of an episode like this and I would ask like, hey, where can we find you? If we want to look you up online, but you're notoriously not online most of the time. So I feel like I should say everybody go follow JD on Instagram, but when's the last time you posted on Instagram?
Listen, if you want to find me on Instagram, find my wife on Instagram, and you'll find me.
This is true.
Okay, she posts enough for both of us, so I feel like I don't need to.
That's good.
That's good. I'm on Twitter more than anything, but you don't want to follow me on Twitter because all I talk about is Ohio State stuff, and I know nobody wants to hear that. So, I don't know, man. I guess here before too long, you'll be able to go to our church website and listen to my sermons every week, But follow Megan Morris on Instagram, wherever you want to follow her, and you'll see pictures of me probably daily.
Yeah, we'll link up. I'll go find a recent sermon. Maybe if you wanna tell me which one you're like most proud of recently, maybe we'll link up to that, and some people can go listen to some of your teaching, because you might say you're not like preaching's not your dude. I've heard you speak on many occasions. You have that gift. You can continue to grow in that gift, but you've got it. And look,
thank you.
There are reasons that when we go to camp, I have students in my youth ministry that ask when you're going to speak. So we'll just lay that out on the table.
Just so you know, I have the same thing. I have people from my ministry ask what day you're speaking. They do. So
well, maybe we'll just
the feeling's mutual there.
Love it. It. Well, dude, thank you so much. I told you before we started recording, I was like, yeah, let's shoot for, 45 minutes or so. And I said the same thing to Sean, and it turned into an hour 5. Well, guess where we're at? An hour 5. So maybe all of these episodes are just going to be that long. And I'm kind of okay with it. I'm pretty okay with it. So if you are watching this on YouTube and you've enjoyed it, go ahead, click the like button. Subscribe to the channel if you're interested. If you want to click the little church bell so that you can get notifications, we would really appreciate it. We'd love for you to come along the journey of taking another step toward becoming the person that you were created to be. If you're listening to this on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or wherever else, if you would be so kind as to go rate and review this podcast, that's really the way that we get to share this with more people. It's much more organic that way. So we just say thank you in advance. But we're really grateful for you. We can't wait to see you in the next one. JD, thanks for being on today. We'll see all of you in the next one. Grace and peace, my friends.